Luke chapter 16, and I'm just going to read verses 1 to 8. The rest of it is good too, but I'm going to read this far. Luke 16, 1 to 8. Jesus also said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. And he called him and said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be a manager.' And the manager said to himself, 'What shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do, so that when I am removed from management, people may receive me into their houses.' So, summoning his master's debtor one by one, he said to the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He said, 100 measures of oil.' He said to him, 'Take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, 'And how much do you owe?' And he said, 100 measures of wheat.' He said to him, 'Take your bill and write 80. The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light.'" That's an interesting parable. The story of the shrewd manager is perhaps the most difficult parable to understand. Surely Jesus isn't holding up this unreliable and dishonest fellow as a good example to follow. Context is needed. And when we discover nuggets of truth to inspire and direct our own money management, this will make more sense. A rich man would normally have a staff working for him. Maybe not quite as many as King Charles, but lots of people have a helper on the farm, or you have a house helper that comes and does some cleaning. A rich man would have more staff than that. Maybe they would have an accountant or a project manager to look after the everyday running of their business things. We don't know who informed the rich man, I'm going to call him the owner, about the indiscretions on the part of the manager. But they must have been credible witnesses, people whom he trusted. It's not the common gossip circle. It's not the after the ladies' tea chit-chat. These were credible witnesses. That must be true because the owner didn't launch an investigation. He didn't check it out. He simply summoned his manager to address the issue. If the owner thought he might catch the manager off guard, maybe he would learn something more. But he would have been disappointed because the manager didn't say a word. He didn't deny the accusation. He didn't defend himself. He didn't make excuses. He didn't try and explain away the problem. He just said nothing. When I read that, I think of how different that was where I worked in Burkina Faso. If a person was guilty of an offense and he was accused of doing that thing, so he's been caught, he's accused, and he's guilty, he will argue strongly and defend himself and insist he didn't do it, couldn't have possibly been him. However, if he was innocent, he would say absolutely nothing, because everybody knows the truth will come out in the end. So if he's innocent, he knows that will be found out. He doesn't need to say a thing. And when you understand the deep reality of that belief and practice, if you're guilty, you defend yourself. If you're innocent, you say nothing. You can save yourself a lot of time investigating something like we were faced with in my office. Fraudulent activity. Money was disappearing. Two men were possible people to do that, had access to that money. The first one was confronted about it, and he went to great lengths to explain that he had nothing to do with that. The second man was confronted, and he said nothing. And I said to the auditor who came to do some investigating, you don't need to worry about the second man. He hasn't answered me a word, so he's innocent. You don't even need to look. The one who's defending himself undoubtedly did it, and we should be able to find it. And we did. It's working with and understanding a culture that helps you to understand what's written about something. And so this story might make more sense if you think of some of that. The manager in this story was guilty. He was also clever. He knew that he was going to be fired. And you might have sometime been in that situation too. Things aren't going very well, and you know we're on a walk towards the door. Use your hat, what's your hurry? The owner in those days, in that place, had a legal right to have his manager arrested and thrown in jail. And he could be held there until he could pay. Remember the unjustly jailed servant in another story who was thrown in jail until he could pay. And how can you pay when you're in jail? The law went further than that to say that he or his family members could be sold as slaves if he wasn't able to pay. But the owner in this parable was not a vindictive person. The manager felt sure that he would be unemployed, but not jailed. He had that kind of knowledge about his boss and trust in him to be consistent in his faithful behavior. So the owner told him, bring in the financial records, and then you're done. So the manager took advantage of that brief bit of time he had while he would go back to his office and gather up the books and bring them to his boss. He took advantage of that time and called in the debtors so he could negotiate deals with them, a reduction in their debt, which they would sign. Why do you think it was done that way? How much do you owe? Write on your bill, no, it's not 1,000, it's 500. Write on your bill, no, it's not 100, it's 80. Why did he ask them to write it? Because he couldn't then be charged with meddling with the books. It was obviously a negotiated deal that they had agreed to, and they signed off on it because it was their handwriting on the paper. He was protecting himself from further litigation. He was clever. Since the debts were to be paid in commodities, oil and wheat, rather than cash, it's quite likely that the debts were not from borrowing money, but they were rather rental payments. And while it was technically illegal for the manager to be conducting business after he had been informed in person, that was the law. If you're threatened with being fired or you hear a rumor that you're going to be fired, it's not valid until your boss says it to your face. But that's what happened. This manager has met the owner, he's been told, bring me in the books, you're done. So now he cannot legally carry on any further business transactions. But the manager had not been investigated by the owner. Nobody was asking any questions. So those debtors didn't know that he was about to be fired. As far as they knew, he was still the legitimate manager. And how would they feel then? Very, very thankful for a generous owner who has, for some unknown reason, decided to slash their debt. What a wonderful thing for a person to do, and they would do it through the manager. That's how business was handled. So they should be very happy. It wasn't harvest season, payments weren't overdue. It must just be the generosity of the owner that's at play. If everything went according to plan, the way the manager thought this through, this would be a win-win-win. The tenants would be happy. The owner would be publicly praised and appreciated, because that's not the kind of news you keep quiet. And maybe the manager would have some new friends who would help him find another job once they find out that he has been let go. We don't know anything about the specific details in this parable, but it's very possible that the manager had been collecting inflated rent anyway to have a little bit extra for himself. That often happened. So this might not have been such a big loss for the owner as it would appear on the surface. We know that in Jewish law, we weren't allowed to charge interest on loans to other Jewish people, so maybe that would have been a way for the manager to have a little extra. In any event, the manager was counting on the consistent, faithful kindness and mercy of the owner. He was not expecting any negative repercussion from this deal making that he did just before he handed in the books. So there's the story with a little bit of cultural perception. And what does Jesus want us to learn from this? If there's a Bible in the pew in front of you, you could take a minute and look at Luke chapter 15, just before this one. When we started to read, it says, Jesus also said to his disciples, this is just a snippet out of a long discourse. Chapter 15 has the 3 parables about lost things: the lost sheep, the lost coin, the lost boy, the prodigal son. In each of those stories, there's rejoicing when the thing that was lost has been found. There's rejoicing in heaven every time someone is welcomed into the family of God. Heaven is our destination when life is over. We're walking with the Lord. And then the parable of the shrewd manager follows immediately after those 3 parables. Some commentaries draw a comparison between the prodigal son and the shrewd manager. There's a rich owner, there's mismanagement of money, there is a day of reckoning, and there's a merciful conclusion. I'd like to share just these several points about this parable. These parables speak to us about the nature of God. God is merciful, loving, and just. He has made a way for us to be forgiven for our sinfulness, and he's preparing a place for us in heaven. Second, sin is a self-propagating behavior. One bad decision often leads to another. A wrongful deed grows into others that are worse. Lies and deception increase. And sin gets going like a snowball, and it grows and it rolls and it grows. Sin is like that. But a day of reckoning is coming. That's our third point to remember. Be sure your sin will find you out. It will happen during our lifetime, and it will happen when we face the judgment seat in heaven. We will give an account of what we have done. We say it in our confession, the things we have done and the things we have left undone. How we have responded to the opportunities that God has put before us. Fourth point, as stewards of the resources God has given us, we will be commended if we use them wisely, extending mercy and generosity as we lay up treasures in heaven. The shrewd manager was commended, but not for his business ethics. He was commended because of his perception of his owner's nature. He knew his boss. He knew who the rich man was. And in parables in the Bible, when there's a mention of a rich man, that always refers to God. In this parable, the manager trusted that since the owner had extended mercy in not putting him in jail or selling him as a slave, he would continue to be merciful and accept the debt reductions. He would just accept those new agreements, and that would be the way it was, in spite of the fact that they had not been negotiated legitimately. I was looking at some commentaries, and this one from the Jesus Film Organization offers this explanation about the parable and what it means. The key to this parable is found in this line: "For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of light." Jesus is giving us an example of how people in the world look out for themselves in a way that God's people often neglect to do. Jesus is giving us an example of how people in the world look out for themselves in a way that God's people often neglect to do. Like the people in the parable, Jesus encourages us to look out for ourselves. Does that mean to take advantage of every opportunity to gain a little more? No, that's not what he means. He's encouraging us to think long term, to store up treasures in heaven. We can read about that in Matthew chapter 6. He's encouraging us to use our finances in a way so that God enthusiastically welcomes us as good and faithful servants. Are you looking forward to that day when Jesus says to you, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of the Lord"? I hope we all are. Well, we're just a few weeks away from Thanksgiving. You will have an opportunity to present a special offering that will go towards the two food banks locally, I think Chesley and Chatsworth. And I want to encourage you this morning, as you reflect on this parable and what it means to you, I'd like to encourage you to ask the Lord what he would like you to contribute as an expression of thankfulness for all his blessings, and as a means of laying up treasure in heaven. You can invest in things in this world that make a difference for people here, and will earn you commendation from Jesus himself in the next. God loves a cheerful giver. He loves an honest, faithful, merciful person. He counts on us to be shining lights, sharing his love in this world. I welcome you to take that to heart and seek for yourself how God wants you to live in accordance with that in the days and weeks ahead. God bless you.